In the summer of 1212, the high plains of Andalusia stood on the edge of destiny. Two worlds, Christian and Muslim, had shared the Iberian Peninsula for centuries, at times clashing in open war, at other times coexisting in uneasy peace. But that summer, the balance of power would be tested in a confrontation that both sides believed could decide the fate of Spain itself. To the north, Christendom rallied under the banners of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre. King Alfonso VIII of Castile carried the weight of command, but he was not alone. King Sancho VII of Navarre brought his rugged warriors from the Pyrenees, while King Peter II of Aragon led the seasoned Catalan and Aragonese knights. Each monarch commanded one division of the coalition army, with Sancho holding the left flank, Peter the right, and Alfonso the center. They did not come only as kings, but as leaders of a crusade. Pope Innocent III had called Christendom to arms, granting indulgences to those who took the cross. Knights of the great religious orders, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the orders of Santiago and Calatrava rode at the heart of the Christian army. From Portugal and Leon came more contingents, marching under the cross even though their sovereigns had stayed behind. French crusaders too joined in, though many would later turn back, exhausted by the long and arduous campaign. Contemporary chroniclers estimated the Christian host at between 20 and 25,000 men. They were fewer than their enemies, but they marched with a sense of holy purpose. For them, this was not only a battle of kingdoms, but a defense of their lands, their faith, and their very way of life. To the south, the Almohad Caliphate had assembled its might. Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir, known to Christian chroniclers as Mir al-Ma'mulin, commanded what was said to be the largest Muslim army to set foot on Iberian soil in generations. The Almohads, a Berber dynasty ruling across North Africa and southern Iberia, had replaced the Almoravids as the dominant Muslim power by the late 12th century. Now, under al-Nasir, they sought to reaffirm their supremacy against the advancing Christian kingdoms. Muslim chroniclers praised the strength of their army, while Christian sources spoke with awe of its numbers, perhaps 30 to 35,000 men. The Almohad position was formidable. Their camp was protected by a deep defensive trench, their lines reinforced with veteran soldiers, and at the Caliph's pavilion stood his most loyal guard, chained African warriors, bound together to ensure none could retreat. To many, it seemed that the Christians were walking into the jaws of defeat, and yet, both armies knew the other could not be ignored. After years of raids, sieges, and uneasy stalemates, this meeting on the plains of Las Navas de Tolosa would be different. The long wait was over. A battle that could decide the course of the Reconquista loomed on the horizon. The armies prepare, and the first clash. As dawn broke on July 16, 1212, the stillness of the Andalusian plateau gave way to the anticipation of war. The two armies had stared at one another for days, measuring strength and patience, but now the silence ended. King Alfonso VIII of Castile gave the order to advance. The Christian host moved forward in carefully arranged divisions. At the center, Alfonso positioned his heavy infantry and the revered military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, alongside the Knights of Santiago and Calatrava. They carried not only swords and shields, but also the reputation of centuries of crusading wars, their very presence a source of confidence for the coalition. On the right marched Peter II of Aragon's Catalans and Aragonese, men hardened by mountain warfare. To the left, Sancho VII of Navarre commanded his seasoned warriors, a towering king leading troops who were fiercely loyal. Their formations were designed for one purpose: to strike with overwhelming force at the heart of their enemy. At the front stood a vanguard of mixed infantry, both light and heavy, armed with long spears, axes, and lances, prepared to break through ranks of Muslim skirmishers. Behind them waited the heavy cavalry, the mailed knights whose charge could decide the battle. Across the field, the Almohad lines stood ready. Their first ranks consisted of lighter infantry, intended to absorb the initial shock. Behind them were the more experienced troops, holding higher ground and fortified by a trench. Above them all, the Caliph's pavilion gleamed, guarded by his chained African soldiers, a human wall of loyalty and discipline. When the Christians charged, they did so with a fury that surprised even themselves. Chroniclers describe the sound as a thunderous roar of hooves, steel, and voices lifted in prayer and defiance. The Christian heavy infantry crashed into the lighter Muslim troops with merciless power. The shock was devastating. The Almohad front lines had not expected such reckless courage, such a headlong assault with no hesitation. Panic spread. Soldiers who moments earlier had stood firm now faltered under the sheer weight of the Christian advance. The infantry of Castile and the Knights of the Orders carved through them with steel, driving deep into the first ranks. Within minutes, the Muslim vanguard broke. Men fled toward the safety of the second line, abandoning their positions as fear overcame discipline. Yet the Christian leaders, cautious despite their early success, did not pursue the fleeing soldiers too far. They knew the true test still awaited the veteran Almohad corps entrenched on the hill ahead. For now, the field was littered with the fallen, the cries of the wounded rising above the clash of arms. The Christians had won the first exchange, but both sides understood that the battle had only just begun. The stalemate at the second line, the initial triumph of the Christian charge, soon met its limit. Ahead of them rose the second Almohad line, positioned on higher ground and shielded by a deep trench. Here the Caliph's veterans waited, soldiers hardened by years of campaigning across North Africa and Al-Andalus. Their discipline was unshaken by the chaos that had swept through the front. When the Christian vanguard reached the slope, their momentum faltered. The trench and elevation broke their charge into fragments, scattering formations that had once surged with unity. Heavy infantry struggled to cross, while cavalry could not gain the speed needed for a decisive impact. What had been a rolling tide of steel now became a grind of shield against shield, sword against scimitar. The fighting was brutal. Neither side yielded. Christian spearmen pressed forward, their lances thrusting into tightly packed ranks, while Almohad infantry countered with curved blades and relentless discipline. Arrows darkened the sky as both sides poured their missiles into the clash below. As the sun climbed higher, exhaustion set in. The Christians, already drained by their furious opening assault, now found themselves locked in a prolonged struggle under the searing Iberian heat. Sweat stung their eyes, armor grew unbearably heavy, and fatigue gnawed at their resolve. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The Almohad lines, steadied by terrain and discipline, pressed back against the weary Christians. Shields advanced step by step, forcing their foes down the slope. For the first time that day, it was the Christian host that found itself wavering. At the center, where Alfonso VIII commanded, the situation grew dire. His men had borne the brunt of the fighting, and their strength faltered. Reports spoke of knights dismounting in exhaustion, infantry struggling to lift their weapons, and murmurs of retreat passing through the ranks. The banners of Castile threatened to fall back, a sight that could unravel the coalition's fragile cohesion. Sensing weakness, the Almohad commanders pressed their advantage. Muslim cavalry surged forward, striking at the exposed flanks and adding to the Christians' peril. The cries of battle shifted. Now it was the Christian lines that reeled under the pressure, their confidence shaken, their momentum fading. What had begun as a thunderous charge of faith now teetered on the edge of collapse. Hours of relentless combat had drained both armies, but the Christians seemed the more vulnerable. In that critical moment, with the sun high and the outcome uncertain, the Reconquista itself hung in the balance. The turning point, Alfonso's gamble. At the heart of the battlefield, the Christian center wavered. Men faltered under the relentless pressure of the Almohad counterattack. The trench and high ground had broken their charges, and fatigue gnawed at both strength and spirit. For many, the thought of retreat began to take root. The coalition, 3 kings and their followers, stood on the edge of disintegration. It was then that Alfonso VIII made his fateful decision. Refusing to allow his army to collapse, the King of Castile gathered his own contingent of heavy cavalry and rode directly into the fray. Chroniclers describe the moment as both reckless and inspiring. Alfonso, clad in armor and bearing his banner, plunging into the melee where his soldiers struggled to hold the line. His presence changed everything. The sight of their king fighting among them reignited the weary Castilian troops. What had seemed a broken line steadied once more. Men lifted their weapons with renewed resolve, and the banners of Castile surged forward again. Seizing the opportunity, Alfonso ordered a countercharge. The coalition's Knights Templars, Hospitallers, Santiago Calatrava lowered their lances and thundered forward. Their heavy armor and war horses crashed into the Almohad cavalry, meeting them head-on. The clash was deafening. Steel rang against steel, horses screamed, and dust rose in clouds as thousands fought at close quarters. Yet the weight of the Christian knights began to tell. Heavier in arms and armor, disciplined by decades of crusading wars, they slowly forced the Muslim cavalry back. Along the flanks, Peter of Aragon and Sancho of Navarre spurred their men forward, riding along the lines to rally morale. Their presence, combined with Alfonso's bold gamble, turned hesitation into determination. For hours, the Christians had been pushed to the brink, but now the momentum shifted. Step by step, the coalition began to reclaim ground. The Almohad cavalry, lighter and less protected, could not withstand the crushing blows of their foes. What had threatened to be disaster for the Christian center transformed into a resurgence. The tide of battle, once so uncertain, began to flow in a new direction. And yet, even as the Christians pushed forward, one final obstacle remained. The Caliph's pavilion, guarded by the blackguard slaves chained together, sworn to die where they stood. To break them would require more than courage. It would demand the decisive strike of the day, the decisive charge in the fall of the Caliph's guard. With the momentum shifting, the Christian coalition pressed harder. Dust and smoke veiled the battlefield, yet within that haze, the lines of the Almohad army began to falter. The once unbreakable host, praised as the mightiest in generations, now strained under relentless pressure. It was then that Sancho VII of Navarre made his move. Towering in stature, the King of Navarre had been waiting for the right moment. With his heavily armed cavalry at his back, he ordered a decisive charge aimed directly at the weakening Muslim lines. Chroniclers record that his knights cut through like a blade, their lances striking with lethal force, scattering those who dared stand in their path. The Almohad ranks crumbled under the assault. Panic rippled through their formations. Soldiers who had once stood firm now sought escape, pressed on all sides by the resurgent Christians. As the coalition advanced, their eyes turned toward the Caliph's pavilion, the symbolic and strategic heart of the Muslim army. There stood the Black Guard, chained together in grim defiance. These men, bound not only by iron but by oath, could not flee, nor did they intend to. They fought with a desperation born of inevitability, their curved swords flashing as they resisted the Christian surge. The clash was savage. Night after night hurled themselves against the human wall, only to be met with ferocious resistance. But weight of numbers and sheer determination began to tell. The chained warriors, unable to maneuver or retreat, were eventually overwhelmed. Cut down where they stood, their sacrifice was immense, but it could not halt the tide. Once the guard fell, the defense of the Caliph himself unraveled. Muhammad al-Nasir, realizing the battle was lost, abandoned the field. His retreat signaled the collapse of the entire Almohad position. What had begun as the most formidable army assembled in Iberia dissolved into chaos. Soldiers fled in every direction, while the Christian advance pressed inexorably forward. The victory was absolute. No quarter was given that day. Few prisoners were taken. By evening, the plains of Las Navas de Tolosa lay strewn with the dead, the silence of nightfall replacing the thunder of battle. The Christian coalition had secured a triumph beyond expectation. The great power of the Almohads in Iberia had been shattered, their aura of invincibility broken. Though Muslim rule would endure in parts of Spain for centuries more, never again would it rise to the same level of strength. Aftermath and historical significance. By the end of that day, victory belonged decisively to the Christian coalition. Chroniclers tell us that as many as 20,000 Muslim soldiers lay dead upon the plains, while Christian losses numbered only a fraction of that, perhaps 2,000. It was a crushing defeat for the Almohads, one from which their power in Iberia would never truly recover. Yet the battle did not immediately end Muslim rule in Spain. Cities such as Córdoba, Seville, and Granada would remain under Muslim control for decades, and the Reconquista itself would stretch onward until 1492, when the last Muslim stronghold of Granada fell to Ferdinand and Isabella. Still, the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa marked a decisive turning point. The aura of Almohad dominance was shattered, and Christian kingdoms gained the momentum that would carry them ever southward. For the Christians, the victory was remembered as divinely ordained a triumph not merely of arms but of faith. The presence of the military orders, the intervention of the three kings, and the sheer determination of their soldiers became part of the legend of Reconquista. For the Muslims, however, the defeat was catastrophic. The Caliphate's authority fractured, and within a generation, its influence in Iberia had all but collapsed. Looking back, the battle stands as more than just a clash of armies. It was a collision of civilizations, of faiths, and of identities, fought on a sun-scorched plateau in Andalusia. The field of Las Navas de Tolosa reminds us of the relentless tides of history, how power rises and how it falls. And perhaps most importantly, it speaks to the human cost of such struggles. Behind the banners and the chronicles were countless men, knights, infantry, slaves who fought, bled, and died. Their stories, though often left untold, echo across the centuries, reminding us that history is not just about victories and defeats, but about lives lived and lost in the making of nations. This was the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, a turning point in the long struggle for the Iberian Peninsula. But what do you think it truly represents? Was it a triumph of faith and unity, or a tragedy born from centuries of division? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your perspective. And if you want to journey deeper into the moments that shaped our world, remember to subscribe to Echoes of History. More stories of battles, empires, and the lives behind them await.
This was the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa,